So let's talk about a really bizarre horror film called Pandemonium. We are Boys on Film. Hello, this is Chris. No, this is Phil, and that's Chris.
I'm Phil, and this is Chris.
It's been one of those weeks. We're all over the place. Anyway, this isn't to be confused with 1982 spoof of slashers, which is also called Pandemonium. This is something else. This is the horror film from Quarxx. What a bizarre name. That is his name, though, Quarxx. I've never heard of him before. He's made quite a few films.
Okay.
French filmmaker.
And it was very French, I thought, as a film, to be honest. Yeah. It was stylish, it was kind of cool and stylish and French.
I thought it had a bit of giallo as well. It was quite Italian in parts.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's not what the Americans would make. It's probably not what the Americans would enjoy watching, particularly.
Or the British, actually.
Or even the British.
So this is 3 stories, isn't it? I didn't actually know that going in. So watching it at the time as it was unfolding, I got a little bit frustrated by that. I think if I'd have known beforehand, I probably would have rolled with it more. But it's 3 stories that unravel in the exploration of tales depicting fallen souls. So quite an interesting premise. I mean, the actual plot is quite interesting. So we've got Hugo, Dillon, who plays Nathan, and Arben, Bajraktaraj. You could probably pronounce it better than me. I did a hopeless job of that. That's Daniel.
I don't know English.
They're caught in a road accident that kills them both. Quite an interesting start. Actually, I thought the start was probably one of the most interesting parts of this film, which doesn't bode well considering it's like hour and 45 minutes.
For me, the first of those stories was absolutely the most engaging. And yes, it's a fairly simple tale, as you say, of a sort of heaven and hell thing, a sort of good and evil thing. And there's a sort of fairy tale aspect to quite a lot of it. And I really enjoyed that first third where, you're trying to work out what's happened to these 2 guys and they're trying to work out what's happened to them. And, and then it's like, oh, well, if they're dead, what's going to happen next? And, and there's this choice between heaven and hell. And of course, they both want to go to heaven. And because of things that they've done, they have to really engage with that question. No spoilers.
Yeah.
And I think that first third's really successful. Then it changes into these other 2, the next 2/3 of the film, which to be honest, I just felt were slightly less successful. They just weren't as clear in their kind of concept or their delivery.
So Nathan's confronting his past, the consequences of his actions. Obviously, he's knocked over Daniel, and it's weird because it's almost a bit like American Wealth in London, or even It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, that same idea of what would happen if we weren't alive kind of thing. I mean, American Wealth in London does it really well, obviously, from 1981. But I thought, this idea reminded me of those films. You see a child as well, and the child is there, and one of them throws her through because she's being a bit of a pain, but there's a reason for that, because when they do go in there, they see her story, or we see her story.
Yeah. And I think, let's talk about that story with the monster.
What was it, Tony the monster in the magic cave?
I've not been able to look anyone in the face called Tony that I know since that film now, because Tony the monster. Like I say, for me, there's something relatively straightforward about the first third of it. It's a bit of a kind of mind skip because they're dead and blah blah blah. Real fairy tale land. This is something that I think I really started to get as we were watching the film more and more. Was it the fairy tale nature of it and the kind of monster thing, and there's something quite childlike about that, where you're going along with these kind of fairy tales that kids, rather the way the kids see the world of good and evil, and there's this kind of binary about good and evil, and in a way that's quite successful. I think you engage with this whole childlike view of the world and of morality, and because this little girl's she's not very nice girl, I've got to say. I didn't really like her.
I was just going to say, on the flip side of that, she's doing things that you wouldn't expect kids to do. I know kids can be evil, and I'm not a big fan of kids in films either. I thought she was really good, the little girl, though, because there was something really evil about what she was doing. I mean, she's doing stuff which is weird for a child to be acting out in a film, for starters. Obviously, when they're making the film, it's a different situation for children, because children are looked after. I mean, all people are looked after when they're filmmaking. When people are doing sex scenes, they're looked after, because they, you don't want to cross boundaries. But I mean, there's a hanging scene that she's present in, which was really, and also there's a cooker scene. I'm not going to spoil anything, but that was quite out there.
I don't know. My theory about this part of the film was that what's going on is that she's a little girl, obviously, and she's got evil parts of her personality. And I wondered if this was sort of basically living in her imagination. Is she imagining all this kind of bad shit? Or is it that maybe she's not acting it? Maybe it's not real. Maybe it's just part of her personality, because everyone thinks that little girls are sugar and spice, and actually they're not necessarily. So that was one reading of it. But that kind of adds to this kind of fairy tale dimension, which I was talking about as well. That maybe it's all allegorical. Maybe it's all just simile for stuff, because then of course after we've dealt with evil child, cooker scene, hanging, nastiness,
and can we just say Tony the Monster in the bath as well, which was really weird. So undressing in front of her, getting into the bath to hose himself down.
Somebody who's never been in the real world, how to eat and how to bathe and stuff when you're a 5-year-old girl, I mean that's going to be a challenge, isn't it? So that's an interesting, you can make a film about that on its own. But then you get the next bit of the film, and to be honest, I've written some notes about it and I can't remember it very clearly, so you're going to have to remind me.
Was it the grief-stricken mother who neglects her teenage daughter? She's been bullied at school, and she... Could be a plot spoiler. Something happens to the daughter. Grief-stricken probably gives it away, actually, thinking about it. And, I guess it's all about... it could have been about regret. It doesn't really go that far into the story, but then it's about what do you do in that situation and how you deal with it. And she doesn't deal with it very well.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, look, for me, I thought it was a really interesting film. It kind of lost a bit of pace and it lost a bit of momentum. And yes, it gets fairy tale-y and quite imaginary and allegorical and all that kind of stuff, and that's quite powerful, but it just wasn't quite focused enough. I'm slightly more used to being a bit tighter than it was, so I was a bit disappointed in that, to be honest, because towards the end as well, there's a sort of reincarnation type thing that goes on from memory, although I can't remember what was going on. I mean, I didn't lose interest, but it was hard to keep up with because there's a lot of these things going on.
Yeah, I think it was the three stories, because I'm not a massive fan of anthologies either, films that throw in so much into one viewing. I would rather that be separated over, say, a series or something, rather than in one film. I don't know. I find it a bit tiresome, but I think what he's done with it is really interesting, and there's a lot going on, like you said, to keep you entertained. But you're right. I think it was that lack of focus that I would rather maybe have had one story and expanded on that story rather than three.
Or to foreground one of the stories a bit more and to use the other two as little devices around it to underpin it or something. I don't know how you would do that, actually, but do you know what I mean? If there was a sort of central story with some things that sort of back it up or fill in some gaps for you, that always works, or that would have worked more successfully for me in this case.
When it started with the two guys and the car accident, I thought, this is great, where's this going to go? And then we don't see them, because obviously it moves on to the girl's story. And I think, like I said earlier, with hindsight, if I'd have known that, I probably would have rolled with it more, but I became a bit frustrated because I kept thinking, where are those two guys? Because I want to see how they're getting on. But obviously there was a reason for that, because it went on to the next story. But
I'd read the synopsis, but I was still sat there wondering what happened to those people. And even three separate stories, because I didn't feel it was sold enough to me as maybe three separate things, or not separate, but like the anthology approach. I didn't think it was marketed in that way enough for the fact that it is like that, really. So I kept wondering what happened to those people.
Yeah, blah, blah, blah. I think he's a really interesting filmmaker, though. I'd be quite keen to see what else he's done. I know there is a film that came out just before this one, I think, that again has a monster figure in it, which is very similar in tone. So yeah, I kind of like that. I was quite unnerved by that monster, and also some of the things that happened in it I was quite unnerved by, so I like that. It was pushing buttons.
It's creepy as, and it's freaky, and it makes you kind of go, oh, a lot, whether that's someone's behaviour or their attitudes or goo or gunge or whatever.
It becomes really intense. That final scene, the last act is really violent and intense, and also disturbing.
Yeah, absolutely. It is disturbing, but because of the lack of focus around that disturbance, it's not as disturbing as other things that you and I have seen together, where it's left an impression and you kind of take that disturbance with you. It doesn't have the same level of impact for me as other things because of the lack of focus.
So this is the Blu-ray release, which I think you've been sent, or did you get the DVD? I haven't been sent the special features. Yeah. So it's high definition, obviously 1080p, and there's new stereo soundtrack. So there's a lot in this package. I think there's an interview with Tony the Monster and also the writer-director Quarxx as well, behind the scenes, making of featurette trailer. Lots of special features. So that's obviously available now if you want to check it out. But you can stream it on Mubi. I think Mubi are showing it online for the on-demand version.
Yeah, I'm going to say that, if you're interested in a kind of adult horror-y, suspensey sort of retelling in a sort of fairy tale type way that really grapples with children's imagination and kind of evil and good, you're going to love this. Now, I'm not saying I don't love those things, but I think that for the right audience, there are going to be some people who just love this film. I think there are going to be people who just totally get it and just totally love it. Sadly, I wasn't one of those people, but I think there are some people out there who this will really appeal to. I think people with those kind of interests are going to get it totally.
What star rating are you going to go for?
It's always me first, isn't it? This time,
of course it is.
You're going first this time.
I'm going for 3 stars. I thought it was solid. I think there was a few problems with it. I thought maybe it could have been a bit tighter, like you say, as the anthology thing I'm not a massive fan of, so that does downgrade the score, which I don't think is a fault necessarily of the writer or director, but it's just something I'm not that overly keen on. But I was entertained by it. I thought bits of it were quite nasty, which I'm a big fan of as well, and I thought the kid was good. There were some bits that made me laugh. Probably they shouldn't have made me laugh, but they did, just because they were so over the top and so nasty. But yeah, 3 stars. All right.
I am going to go lower than that.
Oh, ouch.
Quite simply, I just can't remember the last third or 40% of it. It just didn't. I've got some notes in front of me right now, and I keep looking at them and I keep thinking, I still can't remember. So it just didn't leave enough of a trace for me, to be honest. What did was that first section. The first section of the film really left an impression, very strong, conceptually really good, the way it was art directed. It looked very strong, and I felt if it had carried on at that quality level, I'd be scoring it 3 or 4. But on the basis that I can't even remember what happened in the last sort of third of it, I'm going to go 2 out of 5, I'm afraid. And I'm sad to say that, because it started so well, but it just didn't deliver on that early promise for me. It really didn't.
Honesty is best policy, Chris.
We know that.
So it's Pandemonium. 3 stars from me, 2 stars from Chris. Check it out. Check the link down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. If you're new, please subscribe. We offer quite a lot here, don't we? We're good value for money.
Let's not go into detail about what we will offer to new subscribers, but we will offer things to new subscribers, absolutely.
See you on the next one.